Only after all the fighting is done, when the bravest have fallen in battle, when the war against evil has been fought to its bitter end, only after all this does the myth as fact complete the human story. Only then can joy beyond the walls of the world, become our permanent possession. There is no shortcut to the land of peace, no primrose path to the mansions of the blessed. First come tears and suffering in Mordor, heartless violence at Stable Hill, and horror and death at Golgotha. Perhaps this is why the eucatastrophe is always mixed with grief. The knowledge of the sorrows endured and the struggle against evil lingers on the human heart. And all the host laughed and wept, and in the midst of their merriment and tears the clear voice of the minstrel rose like silver and gold. And all the men were hushed. And the minstrel sang to them, and he kept singing until their hearts, wounded with sweet words, overflowed. And their joy was like swords, and they passed in thought to regions where pain and delight flow together, and tears are the very wine of blessedness. The mingling of grief and joy, so descriptive of our mortal lives, is a recurring theme in the Bible. It is the experience of the Jews in the days of Ezra the prophet, the knowledge of the presence of God after many years of spiritual famine. Returning from bitter years of war and captivity, they began to rebuild the temple of the Lord, their house of worship that had been destroyed by Israel's enemies, initiating a long descent into slavery and exile. And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid, wrote the prophet. But many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they saw the foundation of the temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. The conclusion of the Great War brought its own mix of celebration and sadness. The soldiers of this war had lived through endless days of mud, stench, slaughter, and death. Nothing like it had ever occurred in the history of the world. It shook the very foundations of civilized life. The Great War differed from all ancient wars in the immense power of the combatants and their fearful agencies of destruction, and from all modern wars in the utter ruthlessness in which it was fought, wrote Winston Churchill. All the horrors of all the ages were brought together, and not only armies but whole populations were thrust into the midst of them. Promises of swift victory were replaced by plans for a final breakthrough assault, which always ended in stalemate. It was a war that some feared might go on forever. Whenever one side produced an implement of destruction that promised to tip the scales, writes J.G. Meyer, the other came up with a way to preserve the deadlock. No wonder one newspaper called the armistice the greatest day in the history of the world. There was rejoicing on that day amid the oceans of sorrow. Yet no full and final consolation could be found in the peace that followed. No war could end war for all time or transform the nations into a brotherhood of man. It was a loathsome ending to the loathsome tragedy of the last 4 years, wrote Siegfried Sassoon in his diary. T.S. Eliot saw the post-war world as a wasteland of human weariness. I think we are in Rat's Alley, he wrote, where the dead man lost their bones. Eric Remarque predicted the generation of men broken, burnt out, rootless, and without hope. Civilian life, he said, would bring no comfort to the survivors. We will not be able to find our way anymore. That, my friends, is a part out of the tail end of A Hobbit, A Wardrobe, and a Great War. This is how J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis rediscovered faith, friendship, and heroism in the cataclysm of 1914 to 1918 by Joseph Loconte. And I read this last month as a buddy read with Beth Ann, and I'll have her channel down below. She's got a fantastic channel. She's a great person, a great booktuber. If you don't follow her already, please do. Go check her out. She's got some fantastic stuff. And she picked this up when she was out doing a book swap kind of shopping for me. She saw it was on my list and was like, oh, hey, this looks good. So she got a copy for herself. And I really enjoyed reading this. It's a little over 200 pages. It's not a very long read. It blew by. I mean, the pages aren't densely packed with text, and it was overall really good. I was a little disappointed in the first half of the book. It felt like so much of it was about World War I, laying the scene for the Great War and what caused it and the changes in society leading into it and the thought and the beliefs that were prevalent going into the war about how it would be a quick war and how war is always good for economy, whether you're the winner or the loser. So everyone kind of wanted a war to get things up and running, and they figured that with all the modern advances with science, technology, entering into this new modern intellectual age, that war would be over like that with minimal damage, minimal casualties, and life could go on and everybody would be all the better after what the flash in the pan that they expected to happen for the next war. And we all know that's not how World War I played out. In fact, there were some quotes in there in that passage I read that kind of give a little bit of the grim brutality that was faced, and how it was just a constant stalemate. Every time one side would get some sort of a headway on a breakthrough, the other side would come up with a way to counter it and to relock that stalemate. It was good to have that at the beginning because my background on World War I is admittedly extremely minimal. I know very little about it. In fact, most of what I know about it just came from this book. It's really interesting and kind of fascinating. It's a subject that I want to learn more about. But I was here mainly when I bought it for Tolkien and Lewis and how all of that was playing into there. And it felt like I had about 30% Tolkien and Lewis and about 70% World War I through the first half of the book. And so I was ready to give this like a 3 stars because I didn't want a World War I history book. I wanted to understand more about how it shaped those men and their reactions to it and all of that. And then I got to the second half of the book and it spent a lot of time on both of them. Probably more a little bit on Tolkien than Lewis, which is okay with me. But they both got plenty of time in the limelight there. Both of them fought in World War I, were in really bad situations, and were saved by some fortuitous events along the way. And I can't imagine my bookshelf and just books in general today without these two men and the impact that they had with their writing careers, which could have been non-existent had things gone differently during World War I. But while Tolkien famously says there's no allegory in his works, and his works aren't intended to be allegorical, and he doesn't want people to read allegory into them, there's no denying, especially after reading this, that there are echoes of World War I and of scenes and battles and some of the impacts that he felt that creep into the Lord of the Rings. It would be shocking to find otherwise, actually, because it was such a massive event. It was a time when Tolkien lost pretty much everybody that was close to him during the war. All of his friends did not come back. And so it really plays into that echo of what you see in both the works of Tolkien and in Lewis. Lewis in both the Narnia and the Space Trilogy get some time being mentioned in here. As a whole, I thought it was really nice. It certainly isn't my favorite book on Tolkien or Lewis, but it provides a good focus in on a specific event that was very significant and impactful on both of their lives. And so for that reason, I did enjoy this. This is going to be one I'm going to keep on my shelf and refer back to time and again. Overall, probably about a 4-star read. It was trending far lower than that before I got to the second half and got to the chapters that focused more on the two men that it promised in the title, and less on the Great War as a central figure. But yeah, if you are interested in Tolkien, Lewis, or World War I, you don't even have to be interested in all three. If any one of those three things are of interest to you, definitely check this out. If you're interested in history and like World War I, it might be an interesting thing to see how that shaped and impacted two of the prominent writers of fantasy fiction during the mid 90s, early to mid 90s, and how that all just shaped the landscape in which we know today for modern fantasy and science fiction. So definitely check it out. I do recommend it. It was a good read. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned because I'll have some more reviews coming soon.